Hello brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode here on Dangerous African Confessions HD. In this episode, we have a story from one of our dear sisters, who tells us about her encounter with a pastor who she had met in a prayer center. She reveals her meeting with this pastor led to things that she wants to share with us. This is another story of manipulation, control, and the emotional journey of a woman and how a pastor manipulated her into losing everything. Let us now go into what our sister has for us today. Please subscribe if you haven't done so, and also do like and share this video, so others out there can also benefit from this conversation. And also hit the notification bell, so you will be notified anytime we upload videos.
My name is Akua, and please that is the name I will give out right now. I am a Ghanaian who has carried this secret I am about to share for far too long. And also, it has also become too heavy for my heart to bear. I want to share this story not to point fingers, but to warn others. The reason why I want to do this is very simple. I believe and know that a lot of people do go through similar journey just like I have been through. My journey began at a place I thought would bring me hope but instead brought me despair. The same way others make these journeys seeking for peace and solutions, but always end up being taken for granted and dealt with in a way that becomes too difficult for them to share. And today, I want to stand in for everyone who has been in this shoe before and tell our story. You see, before I start with the whole story, I have been in the lowest part and portion of my life. I got to a place I had been battling so much in my life, broken relationships, financial struggles, and a strange illness the doctors couldn't explain. You see, in my country Ghana where I grew up, it is a country rich with faith and tradition. Prayer centers dotted almost every corner of my hometown, places where people sought divine intervention for all sorts of problems, healing, financial breakthroughs, or deliverance from spiritual attacks. Like many, I believed in the power of prayer and the guidance of men and women who claimed to be anointed by God. At the time, my life felt like it was falling apart. My business, which had once thrived, had crumbled under the weight of mounting debt. My husband had left me for another woman, leaving me to care for our 2 children alone. My husband leaving was not the problem for me in the first place. But, like I said earlier, I had been battling a mysterious illness for months. The doctors could not diagnose it, and every treatment seemed to fail. I was in constant pain, both physically and emotionally. That was the main problem I needed solution to in a very urgent way. Everyone said I needed spiritual intervention, so I began to search for answers everywhere that I could. Honestly, I have been to different church places and there were no answers for my problem. One woman who knew of my situation told us that there was this prayer center that she believes that I would get solution to my problem. And so, I went to the prayer center, desperate for answers. That's where I met this pastor who promised me the hand of God in my problems. Okay, so you want me to talk about that first? Well, you see, he left the very moment in my life when I needed him very much. But I know whatever happens in life, happens for a reason. So, I was cool with it on that level, but deep within me, the betrayal was very deep for me. My troubles began with a strange illness that crept into my life like an unwelcome shadow. At first, it was subtle, an occasional feeling of fatigue and lightheadedness that I brushed off as the result of overwork. I had been managing a small food business, selling wekai at a busy junction in Accra, the capital city of Ghana. The long hours, combined with the heat and constant stress of running the business, often left me exhausted. I assumed it was nothing serious. But over time, the symptoms grew worse. The fatigue became constant, a heaviness that made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. Then came the headaches, sharp and relentless, followed by joint pains that made it difficult to walk or stand for long. My body ached as if it was carrying a weight it couldn't bear. And then there was the most unsettling symptom of all, periodic fainting spells that came without warning. At first, my husband seemed concerned. He accompanied me to a local clinic, where the doctors ran tests but found nothing conclusive. They said it could be stress or perhaps anemia and prescribed vitamins and rest. But the rest did little to help. My condition worsened, and I started losing weight rapidly. My once vibrant skin turned pale, and my eyes grew sunken with exhaustion. As my illness progressed, my husband's concern began to wane. His patience wore thin, especially as I became less able to contribute to the household. Our finances were already tight, and with my inability to work, the pressure on him increased. It wasn't just the financial strain that bothered him. Sometimes, marriage is something I wish everyone will enter before they will talk about someone's issue when it comes out. Brother, I noticed how he started avoiding me, spending more time outside the house. When he was home, he grew increasingly distant, snapping at me over the smallest things. I tried to understand his frustration. He was carrying the burden of providing for our family alone, and my condition had turned me into a shell of the woman he married. One morning when I fainted in the kitchen while trying to prepare breakfast for our children was when I felt the heat. I woke up on the floor to find him standing over me, his face a mix of anger and disgust. He didn't ask if I was okay or try to help me up. Instead, he said he can't do it anymore, and that every day I bring something new. I didn't think so much evil or bad about what he said that day. But today, those words cut deeper than any pain I had felt before. He left the house that evening and didn't return for days. When he finally came back, it was only to pack a bag. He told me he was moving in with another woman, someone he described as less of a burden. I later found out that the woman he left me for was a colleague at his workplace. She was younger, vibrant, and healthy, the exact opposite of what I had become. I couldn't blame him entirely, he had made his choice. But the betrayal shattered me. I had believed that marriage was a partnership, a commitment to stand by each other in sickness and in health. Yet, when I needed him the most, he chose to abandon me. His departure left me in a deeper pit of despair. Not only was I battling an illness that no one could diagnose, but I was now alone to care for our 2 children. My daughter was 7, and my son was 5. They were too young to understand the gravity of what was happening, but they sensed the change. My children would often ask when their father was coming home. But I never had the heart to tell them the truth. The stress of husband's departure only worsened my condition. I began to develop mysterious rashes on my arms and legs, and my fainting spells became more frequent. I would sometimes wake up on the floor, disoriented and in pain, with my children crying beside me. I felt like a failure as a wife, a mother, and a provider. Friends and family tried to help in small ways, but most of them had their own struggles. Some suggested I visit traditional healers or herbalists, claiming that my illness might be spiritual in nature. Others urged me to seek help at prayer centers, insisting that divine intervention was my only hope. At first, I was skeptical. I had grown up in the church and believed in God, but I wasn't sure if running from one prayer camp to another would solve my problems. Yet, as my situation grew more desperate, I found myself clinging to any glimmer of hope. My husband's betrayal left me with a deep sense of inadequacy. I couldn't stop thinking about the words he had said to me that morning in the kitchen. Was I really a burden? Was my illness a punishment for something I had done? These thoughts haunted me, eroding my self-worth and pushing me further into despair. It was in this fragile state that when the woman had also called out that I should go to the prayer center, I decided to visit the prayer center. I told myself that if there was even the slightest chance that God could intervene and restore my life, I had to take it. Little did I know, my search for healing and deliverance would lead me into an even darker chapter of my life. One Friday morning, I found myself at the gates of a well-known prayer center on the outskirts of Accra on the Akron-Sowam Road. The center was bustling with activity. Men and women, some in tears, others fervently praying, filled the open compound. The air was thick and the sound of worship songs played through loudspeakers. I had never felt so small and insignificant. My illness had drained every ounce of confidence I once had. My body was frail, and my spirit even weaker. I wasn't sure where to start or who to approach, but something about the place drew me in. It felt like a last hope, and I clung to that. As I stood there, unsure of where to begin, a man dressed in a flowing white robe approached me. He introduced himself as one of the leaders of the center. I never knew that, later that would come to be a total lie. His presence was commanding. He seemed to radiate confidence and authority. After asking me a few questions about my situation, he paused and closed his eyes as if receiving a divine revelation. Then, he began to speak words that sent chills down my spine. He described my struggles in detail, my failing business, the betrayal of my husband, and even the pain I felt in my body. He told me that the Lord had revealed to him that I was under attack by evil forces. He spoke of curses and spiritual battles, of jealous enemies who had bewitched me to see my downfall. According to him, these attacks were the reason for my illness and misfortunes. But then he offered a glimmer of hope. He said that God had a great plan for my life. He saw visions of wealth, success, and restoration. My family would be reunited, my health would be restored, and I would become a beacon of light for others. But there was a condition. I needed to take a step of faith and trust in God's ability to deliver me through His servant. I was overwhelmed by His words. They were exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. He promised that if I trusted in God and followed His guidance, I would receive blessings beyond my imagination, health, wealth, and restoration. And I believed him. I froze, unsure of how to respond. How could he know? How could he possibly understand the battles I had been fighting, the pain that consumed me daily? Yet, every word he spoke resonated deeply with me. Tears streamed down my face as he spoke. No one had ever articulated my pain like this before. It was as if he had reached into my soul and pulled out everything I had been too afraid to say out loud. He told me that God has sent him to help me, but I must trust him and take a step of faith. And told me that I may be the reason why God directed him to be at the prayer center. In that moment, I felt hope for the first time in months. His words were like a lifeline, and I clung to them desperately. When he invited me to his church, I didn't hesitate. He promised that his church was a place where miracles happened, and a place where people like me found deliverance. The following Sunday, I attended his church, and true to his word, it was unlike anything I had experienced before. The atmosphere was electric, filled with fervent prayers and emotional worship. The pastor preached with such passion and conviction that it was impossible not to believe in his words. After the service, he called me aside and reiterated the prophetic message he had given me at the prayer center. He told me that for my breakthrough to manifest, I needed to sow a seed of faith. The first time, he asked for 500 Ghana cedis. It was a significant amount for me, but I didn't question it. He explained that the seed was not just money, it was a spiritual act of trust that would unlock God's blessings in my life. He quoted scriptures about giving and receiving, assuring me that God would return it to me 100-fold. When nothing changed after the first seed, he said I needed to sow again. This time the amount had increased from the first amount. He said that the enemy is resisting my blessings, he explained. I shouldn't let fear hold you back. God will honor my faith. By this time, I had nothing left in my savings. I was barely scraping by, using what little I earned to feed my children. But his words were powerful, and his promises felt real. He told me that my healing and financial breakthrough were just around the corner. Desperate and afraid of missing my miracle, I took a loan. The loan was for 3,000 Ghana cedis, and I gave it all to him as a seed. It was money I didn't have and couldn't afford to repay, but I was too blinded by hope to see the danger I was walking into. He assured me that God would provide, that the blessings coming my way would far outweigh the sacrifice I was making. Months passed, and nothing changed. My health continued to decline, my business remained in ruins, and the loan repayments loomed over me like a dark cloud. The creditors began calling, and I didn't know what to tell them. Each time I went back to the church, he had a new explanation. He said the delay was because the enemy was fighting harder now that my breakthrough was near. He urged me to sow more seeds, to keep fighting in faith. I was trapped in a cycle of giving and waiting, each time sinking deeper into debt and despair. The pastor's words, which once gave me hope, now felt like chains. I couldn't see a way out, but I was too afraid to stop. He had made me believe that if I didn't follow through, I would forfeit my blessings and remain under the enemy's curse forever. You see, my brother, at this time, I was tired already. And it was during one of my many visits to the church, burdened by debt and the weight of unanswered prayers, that he informed me that my case required a deeper spiritual intervention. He explained that the spiritual attacks against my life were far stronger than he initially realized, and these forces were blocking my blessings. He said this was why my illness persisted, my debts increased, and my life seemed stuck in an endless cycle of misery. He called it a divine ritual of covenant, a process through which God would sever the ties of evil binding my life. His words were laced with urgency and authority, convincing me that this was the final step to unlock my breakthrough. By this time, I was so desperate for relief that I would have done anything he suggested. He told me that I needed to undergo some rituals that would see the heavens open for me. The ritual was scheduled for a Friday night, during one of the church's all-night prayer vigils. After the main service, I was led to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the church. The room was dark, with bare walls and a small altar draped in white cloth. Candles flickered around the edges, casting eerie shadows. 2 other church members, both women, joined us. They were introduced as prayer warriors who would assist in the spiritual process. The pastor instructed me to kneel before the altar while he prayed over me. His tone was commanding, and his words were a mix of scripture and strange phrases I didn't understand. He handed me a piece of paper and a pen, instructing me to write down the names of everyone I believed had wronged me or contributed to my suffering. He said this was a symbolic act of releasing bitterness and unforgiveness, which he claimed were also blocking my blessings. Afterward, he asked me to write down every financial seed I had sown into the church. I hesitated at the last request. Writing down the money I had given felt strange, but he insisted it was part of the spiritual process. He told me that it is not for men. It's for God. By putting it on paper, you are surrendering it to Him completely. And so, I obeyed reluctantly. Once I finished, he took the paper and held it above the altar, chanting prayers that sounded increasingly intense. He then lit a candle and burned the paper, telling me to watch as the smoke rose. He told me that, by doing so, I have surrendered my all to God. I remember exactly what he told me. He told me that, from this moment, I must never speak of the seeds again. To do so would be to reclaim what I have given to God, and that will bring a curse upon my life. You see, the next thing was the most unsettling part of the ritual. He produced a small bowl containing what he called holy oil, mixed with herbs and ash from the burnt paper. He anointed my forehead, palms, and feet with the mixture, praying loudly as he did so. Then he made me repeat a series of vows after him. The vows were peculiar and specific. I promised never to question the seeds I had sown or the processes God used to bless me. I vowed to never speak ill of the church or the man of God who had been sent to guide me. Lastly, and most disturbingly, I swore that I would never reveal the details of the ritual or the financial contributions I had made, as doing so would invoke God's wrath and open me and my family to severe spiritual attacks. My brother, I understand what you feel. But to get to where I went to in my life, you would do same if you were in my shoes. He made it clear that breaking these vows would bring catastrophic consequences, not just for me, but for my children as well. The fear he instilled in me was overwhelming. I felt trapped, bound not just by the promises I had made, but by the terrifying consequences he described. Before the ritual ended, he handed me a small white cloth and a bottle of the same holy oil used during the ceremony. He instructed me to anoint myself with the oil every morning and carry the cloth with me at all times as a symbol of my covenant with God. He said, it was to remind me of the promises I have made that night and to protect me from the enemy's schemes. For days after the ritual, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. While the pastor presented it as a sacred act, something about the process felt wrong after it. I began to realize that the vows I had taken weren't just about faith, they were about silencing me. Whenever doubts crept in, I would remind myself of the threats he had made about breaking the covenant. The fear of spiritual attacks and harm to my children kept me bound in silence. Even when creditors called, demanding repayment of the loans I had taken for the so-called seeds, I felt powerless to explain my situation. How could I tell them the truth when I had sworn never to speak of it? Over time, the weight of the ritual and its implications grew unbearable. The white cloth, which was supposed to bring me comfort, became a symbol of my bondage. The oil, which I had used religiously every morning, felt more like a chain than a blessing. The aftermath of the ritual was nothing like what he had promised. Instead of feeling blessed or protected, I began to notice strange and troubling changes in my life. The sense of unease that had plagued me since the night of the ritual intensified, and it wasn't long before things started falling apart in ways I couldn't explain. The most immediate consequence of the ritual was a deep spiritual darkness that seemed to hang over me like a thick, suffocating fog. It was as if I was being haunted by a presence I couldn't see but could always feel. It wasn't just the weight of the vows I had taken, it was something far deeper. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake at night, my mind racing with fear and regret. The worst part was that I had begun to feel disconnected from God. The very thing that was supposed to bring me closer to Him had instead created a deep chasm between us. I couldn't pray without feeling a sense of shame, as though my words were being blocked by some unseen force. My health, too, deteriorated rapidly. The illness that had begun with fainting spells and joint pain now escalated into more severe symptoms. I developed chronic insomnia and started losing my appetite completely. I felt as though my life was draining from me, slowly but surely. My skin grew pale, my hair thinned, and I became so weak that I could barely get out of bed. The financial burden of the loans I had taken for the seeds became an even more pressing issue. I was no longer able to make ends meet. The creditors were becoming increasingly aggressive, and I couldn't find the courage to explain to them that I had given all that money to the pastor in the name of faith. I was trapped, my body was weakening, my finances were falling apart, and my spirit was crushed under the weight of the vows I had made. Then came the worst consequence of all, the sense of spiritual oppression that seemed to invade every part of my life. I would hear strange whispers at night, voices telling me I had made a terrible mistake, that I was doomed for eternity because I had broken my covenant with God. I had promised not to speak of the ritual, not to speak of what had been done to me, but the silence became unbearable. It felt like the very air around me was charged with a malevolent force that held me captive. The more I tried to ignore these voices, the stronger they became. The isolation I felt grew unbearable. I was drowning in my own fear, and I could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was the manipulation of evil powers that had latched onto my life. One night, after a particularly harrowing experience where I woke up from a nightmare in which I was trapped in a pit, I knew I couldn't go on any longer. I had to break free from this cycle. I remembered the prayer center, the place I had first gone to in search of hope. In my desperation, I decided to return there, seeking the help I had once dismissed. I arrived at the prayer center in the early hours of the morning, hoping to find some clarity, some answer to the darkness that had consumed my life. Some women I met there directed me to the lead pastor at the prayer center. He was a calm and gentle soul, known for his deep understanding of spiritual warfare. I told him everything about the rituals, the vows, the money I had given, and the torments that had followed. I held nothing back, spilling my heart to him, tears streaming down my face as I confessed my helplessness. He listened intently, his expression one of deep concern. He didn't judge me, instead, he simply nodded and began to pray for me. He said something that stuck with me. He said that, no matter how deep the darkness, God's light is greater. He said again that no evil power can withstand the name of Jesus. His words were simple, yet they carried such weight and comfort that, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. After hearing my story, he assured me that I had not lost my chance for restoration. He told me that the pastor who had led me into these rituals had indeed used manipulation and deceit, and the powers I had encountered were not of God but of demonic forces. When I described the pastor to him, he shed tears. Apparently, I wasn't the only person he had used that on. And they have asked him never to step foot there ever again. He told me that I was led astray, but God is still with me. He promised me that the power of the enemy can be broken, and I can be restored to the light of God's grace. He instructed me to fast for 3 days, to focus entirely on prayer and seeking God's intervention. During this time, he would lead a team of intercessors in fasting and prayer on my behalf. I spent all the days at the prayer center. He explained that breaking the chains of spiritual bondage wasn't something that could be done lightly. It would require the power of prayer, the authority of Christ, and my own willingness to fight back against the darkness that had claimed me. Those 3 days of fasting were the hardest I'd ever endured. My body cried out for food, and my mind rebelled against the stillness. But in the silence, I began to feel a shift. It was as though the walls I had built around my heart started to crumble. I prayed, not just for deliverance but for the strength to stand firm in the truth. I asked God for forgiveness for my ignorance and for the choices I had made. I begged Him to restore my life, to lift the heavy burden that had been placed upon me. On the 3rd day, the pastor and the team gathered around me. They prayed in tongues, calling on the power of God to break every chain. The room was filled with a palpable sense of divine presence. As they prayed, I felt something inside me snap, like a long-held tension breaking free. The oppressive weight that had clung to me for so long began to lift. I felt lighter, freer. My mind, which had been clouded by confusion and fear, was suddenly clear. The next day, which would be my 5th day there, the pastor told me that every chain that has been placed upon me is broken. He told me that the enemy has no hold on me anymore. He said I was free in Jesus' name. And I will start to see miracles happening in my life. Tears flowed from my eyes as I felt the power of God's deliverance surge through me. I knew, deep in my heart, that I had been set free. The fear, the oppression, and the darkness were gone. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. Life began to turn little by little in my favor. As you can see, I am well now. And I have started some small business, and I know with God's power, everything will work for me in His name. Please, I would like to let whoever is listening to me to understand that not all pastors are of God. And so, if you ever come across any pastor, let the godly spirit in you take control so you will be able to know the truth from the lies.
Don't forget to please subscribe, share and like our videos. Kindly hit the notification bell so you will be the first to get notification to our videos when we upload. I want to today borrow our sister's own words as the piece of advice for us all. Let your inner man or spirit work anytime you meet any man who tells you he or she is a man of God, so that you will be able to know the lies from the truth. You see, faith when placed in the wrong hands can also be a weapon, one that can destroy you. We don't do this work to condemn the church or to tell you not to believe. No, that is not why we do this work. All that we want you to know or hear is to be careful. Be vigilant. Not everyone who stands behind a pulpit is a servant of God. Not everyone who calls themselves a prophet or a pastor is truly anointed. Some of these so-called men of God are nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing. They use the name of God to manipulate, to control, and to take. They preach about blessings while living in luxury built on the sacrifices of people like you and I. I beg you, brothers and sisters, ask questions. Pray for discernment. Test the spirits, as the Bible says. Do not let anyone guilt you into giving beyond your means or participating in things that feel wrong in your spirit. Just like I always say is that, my heart aches for those who place their trust in men, believing they are receiving blessings from above when, in truth, they are entangled in a web of darkness. I hope that this will be a lesson etched in the hearts of those who dare to tread the fine line between faith and fanaticism. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. And always question the source of power before you place your trust in it. This platform is for us to learn that not everything that claims to be light is light. Be careful where you place your trust. And also seek to associate yourself with genuine people of light. If you've ever been in a similar situation, or if you feel something's not right in your church or community, leave a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories, because sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we see, they're the ones we don't.